Listen up. There is one thing that the fishing community has misled its anglers on more than anything else, and it's around this subject of of colors. We say, oh, at certain water temperatures you need to throw red, and at certain water temperatures you need to throw a chartreuse. There's nothing that can be more false than that. Really and truly, we catch fish on certain colors for one reason. In this video, I'm going to talk about that one reason, that when we throw certain colors, certain color topwaters, certain color spinnerbaits, crankbait, whatever the case may be, why we catch more fish on those colors. I'm going to talk about that one reason. In particular, if you're a new fisherman, say you started fishing in the last 3, 4, 5 years, I have a school where I teach people how to catch fish. And this clip that you're going to watch in this video is from one of my in-person seminars. Now, you're probably thinking, I don't have time to come to one of your seminars. I live in Utah, I live in Minnesota, I live in Florida, Georgia. Hold on, I got you. I also have an online course. I'm going to leave the link for the school in the description box and the comment section, and you can also use the scan bar that I'm going to put somewhere in this area right here on the video. This is a clip from the in-person school. If you want to join online and learn how to catch more fish, learn how to use the right color crankbait, spinnerbait, top water, plastic worm, doesn't matter where it is, come to my school, Straight Up Fishing School. I guarantee you're going to catch more fish. You're going to learn more about what gear to use, what color to use, and what baits to use, but only if you want to catch more fish.
Okay. So his question was about colors, fire crawls and the reds in that muddy water, like what you see. When the water's muddy like this, I'm not really that worried about colors that much. I'll throw a spinnerbait with like transparent skirt on it, because it's the feel and the sound, the vibration is your main factor in that. Now, with that being said, like if I throw on a crankbait, it's probably gonna be like chartreuse and black, chartreuse green, reds. I'll throw the reds. In my opinion, now, so those are just facts that I just let out, right? Now, here comes my opinion. Here comes my twist. Here comes my own thoughts here. The reds are the first to disappear with no light. That's the first. That it's a science. That's a science-based deal. It's hard for me to get into the depth part of it, but the reds disappear first. We use, you know why we, first, something people talk about with reds? Use reds when the water's 50 degrees and below 55. They always say that, right? You know why you catch fish on reds when you throw them in like 50 degrees and below? Or 59, whatever they say, 50 in the 50s? Because you're throwing reds when the water is that color, water that temperature. It ain't because the fish said, you know what, I feel like, man, it's cold, let me get red. That's when we start throwing it. That's what you hear about. And that's what people start throwing. When it gets that cold. Red is actually the best clear water color, because the clear water doesn't filter as much UV light. It's the best clear water color. And when I go at home, if I'm gonna throw a crankbait like at Hartwell in the clear water, I throw in red. I feel like red works because that's what we throw. I didn't say that was a fact. I didn't say you need to say what Brian said. You ain't gotta don't get on nobody's YouTube talking about Brian said. Hey, if they said red work, let them believe it. Leave me out of it. I'm telling you, leave me out of that conversation, because you're gonna start a fight. It's one of them things, yeah, that's one of them things you write down if you want to, but boy, that's just reds. I think red works because a lot of times we throw in red. Have you ever tried a red in November or October? It works in October too. I done tried it. It works in October too. That's when I realized, we made that one up. Like we really just drew up something and just said that's why you need to throw it. But I mean, I would feel completely comfortable out there in that water throwing a red crankbait. And I would be throwing it because I wanted to throw a red crankbait. I don't feel like the color matters enough with the situation that you're going to be faced with out there. That's what I feel like. Personal, me. I ain't saying that's a fact. I'm saying that's just the way I feel. If you look at bait trends and new baits that have actually penetrated the tournament market. There ain't been but about 2 new baits that have penetrated in the last 20 years. 20 years sound like a long time, since 2004, early 2000. Ain't been but 2. If you ask me, there's only been really chatterbait, maybe a whopper plopper. With the exception of the chatterbait, there's a very obvious thing that's going on. I alluded to it when we were ending this last segment. There's a very obvious trend when you think about what baits are good, what people catch fish on, and what, if you'll watch even your tackle box, very obvious trend. And the whole do nothing, very simple, very subtle action baits are really starting to take over the bait community. We got a new chatterbait trailer. It's called a chatter spike. Is that what we call it? All right, so let's look at a chatter spike. Where is it? I got some over here somewhere, right? Yeah, right here. So in times prior, you know, and I still fish this. This is my number one. When I go to throw a chatterbait, this guy, minnows, in whatever color I need, right? So it might be in a black and purple demon. It might be in green pumpkin, some type of green or browns. Something with a paddle tail on it. In my mind, I was like, oh, you want something to move some water, something to create some more water disturbance. But even in the world of chatterbaits, if you notice, I think Yamamoto came up with a new trailer. And look at this guy. What is that? Nothing. In your mind, you say, oh, that takes all the action. But it's tight. It ain't this. It ain't this. It ain't this. If you look at any top 10 on any tournament, anywhere, what's another bait that you've seen dominating every tournament this year? Some type of jig head minnow, which is pretty much what's the thing that Jacob makes? It looks exactly like this. Less, nothing. You put it down in the water, you put this on a jig head or a hook, you put it down in the water, it don't do nothing. Very subtle action. Even this, so I throw this swim bait on a jig head a bunch. And it's very subtle on a jig head. When you put it on a chatterbait or a swim bait, on a spinnerbait, it looks a little bit different. But when you put it on just a jig head, it's actually very subtle. And so what we're basically doing as fishermen is we are doing a lot of finesse fishing, but we don't label it as finesse fishing like we did in the past. You know, in the past, when you thought about finesse fishing, you thought about light line, you thought about little bitty worms, you thought about smallmouth fishing, fishing out west in California, you thought about drop shots, but all of those attributes of finesse fishing are starting to leak over into baits that we traditionally use as power fishing baits. So what I wanted to make you aware of that with the new bait trends. Less is more. Remember that. Less is more on our baits. Talk about finesse fishing when it's done. I think growing up, like we talked about in that very first lesson, that growing up in upstate of South Carolina, just finesse fishing became very subtle to me. I mean, not very subtle, very second nature to me. And when I started traveling away from home, started fishing the Okeechobees and the Gunnersville, and I just in my mind, just because I saw people fishing different ways, different techniques, they were using bigger gear, heavier gear, bigger baits, louder baits. I thought that the finesse techniques that I learned how to fish with weren't going to work. And when I went to Gunnersville, Okeechobee, I couldn't have been more wrong. We're going to talk about some scenarios that you may want to finesse fish, that you should consider mixing it into some of the fishing that you're already doing. Everybody knows when you go to Okeechobee, when you go to Florida, period. What do they tell you? Leave them spinning rods at home. You want to start thinking of ways you can use finesse techniques that maybe don't make sense. Okeechobee was that place for me. One of the things I love to do when I go to Okeechobee is throw a wacky rig, weightless, because you're only working with so much water there. Okeechobee, they had just went through a cold front, started warming up. What's the first thing the fish do when it starts to warm up and it's sunny? They start getting up high. Start getting up real high. You go in there with that weightless wacky rig, and that thing just sets. You throw it at those reed heads, and it just goes. He's got time to think about it. Those fish really don't want to bite. They really just want to be left alone. They're just like you are when you try and get away from them kids. And I guess it's just me because ain't nobody shaking their head. Yeah, you try and get away from them kids just for a minute to yourself. And you just sit there on the toilet. Them fish, that bass, they really want to be just left alone for a little bit. But it's just the fact that that thing is just sitting there, just going back and forth, back and forth. And finally, he just gets up and just, that's the deal. And the reason I'm telling you, you want to, how's that going to work for me here on Sinclair? How's that going to work for me here on my home lake, wherever you may live? This lake right here gets a lot of pressure. What are you going to do different? Everybody comes through there with their chatterbait. They just are whining and chucking and whining and talking and trolling motors are going. What are you going to do different? What are you going to do different? Are you going to throw a wacky rig out here in this muddy water? Probably not, but no. But if you take a gremlin and put him on an 1/8 ounce sinker and have something that just slowly falls down into a fish's bed, slowly goes down by a dock piling, that's the difference. Because a lot of people won't slow down to do that. When I go fishing, 90% of the time it's somewhere I've never been. I don't know where the dam is or where the river is. I don't know nothing. I just show up and it's time to go fishing. And I got to find fish, and I got a limited amount of time to find fish. One of the best ways to find fish is through finesse fishing. This is a terrible analogy. I'll be honest with you. Some of you guys, if you're 35 and older, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Y'all remember back in the day we used to have, when you were in school, you had that DARE program? Something like that, right? DARE, to keep kids off drugs. But they talked about gateway drugs. You start smoking cigarettes before you know it, you're smoking pot before you smoking pot, now you're on heroin, now you're shooting up all kinds of stuff, right? Or you got gateway baits. This is a terrible analogy, but I like it because it makes sense in my head, okay? Yeah, gateway baits, all right? If you get really good at throwing a soft plastic worm on a jig head, the very simple stuff, you get really good at finesse techniques because you get data, and if you get bites, which is the data, it shows you where fish are living, or at least where they are. If you know where they are, the fish are pretty dumb. At least you know where they are, you can start using other baits. When I know that other stuff, like I was showing you, catching fish out of laydowns and stuff like that, once you're able to catch them on one bait, it opens your eyes to other baits you might be able to catch them on. Now I can start expanding the baits that I want to use for that particular structure, wherever it is. That's why I like finesse baits. When I talk about using finesse techniques, talk about when people saw me using that spinning rod at Okeechobee, first thing they say, I can't believe you're throwing that little bitty line, little bitty rod and reel, little bitty there. Listen, I had a spinning rod in my hand. When you see it, I think I actually did have that on here. I had a spinning rod in my hand, but that spinning rod, it was tricked out. Hey, it was like one of them, you see them kids that drive like a Honda CRV and it sounded whoop, whoop, whoop. It was one of them. It might have been a little Honda, but it was souped up underneath. One of the most important things that we have as fishermen is with spinning gear, braided fluorocarbon setup. Braided fluorocarbon allows you the ability to be flexible in your line choices. Okay? When I was fishing Okeechobee last year, I was using 15-pound test braided. I was using a 17-pound test fluorocarbon leader. Try to spool up 17-pound test fluorocarbon on your spinning reel. That bad boy gonna jump off of there like a poodle. Oh, it's a slinky. It's gonna be ugly. He gonna come. You try to curl it over, and the moment that line gets slack in it, it's gonna go, and you're gonna have some problems. With braided fluorocarbon, that allows us to have flexibility. You got that 15-pound test braid, now I can use a 10-pound leader, 6-pound leader, 20-pound leader. We use line to help us get the job done. That's all the line is for. We ain't worried about the fish seeing the line, whatever. If I were to try to use, normally I would fish about 10-pound test fluorocarbon to 10 or 15-pound test braid in a normal situation. But when I went to Okeechobee, if I would have tried to do what you saw me do, I know we got that. That was that SUF B-roll thing. I know we got that somewhere. That was on my iPad. When I was doing that, if I would have tried that with 10-pound tests, that wasn't gonna work. I would have never got any of those fish in. I'm like, no, not even the little ones. You wouldn't get them in. But the fact that I could take that braid, I could take a really light lure on my spinning rod, put it in a place that didn't make sense to do them, nobody else would do it. I could get that fish out of the cover because I had the 20-pound test fluorocarbon on. That's what the braid, the fluorocarbon setup is about. So 15-pound test braid, 17-pound test fluorocarbon leader. That's that BLAT Signature Series spinning rod. That's a Shimano X-Sense reel.
That's a catfish.
He was not indeed a catfish. I'm in control at this point. It won't look like it. I'm about to lose
As you
control.
watch this video, I'm sure the thought runs through your mind.
Out of control.
Why is it taking so much time? Why don't you just bring that fish in the boat?
Out of
Fish
control.
like this, you can literally go from not cashing a check to 10, 20, even $100,000 over just one fish catch like this.
This is when it got bad.
But you got to get it in the boat. So that's why I take my time.
Line got it in the motor, dude. Try that with 10-pound test line. I'm done.
No, I didn't. Quite discombobulated there for a minute.
Shut up, JT.
It's the first time we've seen
Why would you say that? You got thought to say that now?
Wow. Yeah. Nice.
Okay. All right, so that don't get to happen. That don't get to happen if you don't use the right equipment. Listen, I never get this. So a lot of people say, well, I would have put it on a bait caster. You would have never got the bite, dummy. You won't get the bite with a bait caster in a Texas rig. You don't get the bite. You don't get the data. You don't get to play the game with a bait caster with that. You gotta have that setup. You gotta have that setup. That's finesse fishing when it's dumb. Okay? Something a weird phenomenon we call herring spawn. Anybody familiar with the herring spawn or fished a herring spawn before? It's our Carolina version of shad spawn. We don't really have many lakes with a shad spawn, but we have blueback herring. And they get on these points, and there's times where you can see the fish up there on the points looking for the herring, and then there's times where you don't see them there, but they're there. And you might, the most famous way to catch fish on herring spawn is on top water, some type of top water, some type of walking style top water. Problem with that is they don't always hit the top water, but the herring is still there, and the fish is still there. But they might not always, in certain weather conditions, hit a top water or strike at the top water. But they might hit one of my favorite baits to throw on a herring spawn. You probably won't believe it. It's a freaking Carolina rig. Drags the bottom. Finesse. It's a gateway. So many times they would start. The herring spawn bite, the blueback herring spawn bite is a deal that usually works best in the morning. Any kind of shad spawn, it's always best in the morning. Most of the time, generally speaking, best in the morning, right? Well, what happens if you're practicing for a tournament next weekend and you don't get it on the water to 10 o'clock, or you do get on daylight? What are you going to do for the rest of the day? After 10 o'clock, you're just going to just throw your hands up. Well, I found 1 point today, and just throw your hands up. You got to find another bait that maybe will catch those fish even when the sun is up. And a lot of times for me, that has always been finesse baits. Shake your head. It's been drop shot. Even a bait that you might not think of as a finesse bait is a weightless minnow bait. Fluke. I'm going to roll my eyes every time somebody says a minnow bait. I'm like, man, that ain't what that is. It's been out for years. It's a fluke, man. You know what I'm saying? I hate it. God dang, it makes me so sick. Everybody's like it's something new come around. It's a fluke. Weightless fluke. Those are baits that you might have to use if you don't catch them that first hour. You can't just throw your hands up. If I'm practicing for a $100,000 tournament out here on Sinclair or on Hartwell, and after 10 o'clock, herring kind of start to go down deeper water or fish start to move out a little further, I can't just give up and throw my hands up because they're not biting the top water no more. Now I go in there with those finesse baits and I get that data that I need. Then tomorrow or in the tournament or the next day in the tournament, then I can go back in there with my power fishing baits. It's the gateway baits. Starting with this leads to you using other baits, big swim baits, the Sebilles, the mag drafts, all the other baits that you can use to target those points. Do you see what I mean by that? Y'all following what I'm saying? With using finesse baits to get the data, to get the information that you need to use to catch more fish.